Welcome back. All right, so news of the day video for all you fine people for Sunday, November the 6th. Starting off with things out of Calgary. So last night, as things continued to unravel for Calgary after what was an excellent start to the season, now they just don't look like the same team. There was some benching that went on. So Daryl Sutter basically in the third period and for the overtime, Lucic, Backlund, Rooney, and Mackey benched. Keep in mind that this was with Michael Stone also injured. So basically, Calgary played with four defensemen. So record ice time for Anderson, who was, I think, 29 and a half minutes of ice time. And they played well. They did. They played well. They came back. They tied it, forced overtime. They did lose in the overtime. But at least they fought back, and that's the positive for Calgary. We'll see how things go for them this upcoming week. One thing with New Jersey now, as the wins rack up, and they're up to 6 straight wins now, the speed and skill are the name of the game. And the way New Jersey's playing right now is reminding me very much of the way Florida and Carolina looked early last season. It's that transition, it's that speed, it's that skill. It's the thing that every GM in the National Hockey League talks about acquiring and talks about getting in their lineup, but New Jersey's actually done it. And they went through a lot of pain along the way, too. Their fan base has gone through a lot of pain along the way. So with 6 straight wins, New Jersey now, I think as this goes along and people are more and more aware of how well they're playing, it's going to get tougher. Teams are going to figure something out. And then it's about New Jersey fighting through that as well. Seattle, I think it's going to be the same thing. I think now Seattle, with the solid record, I think you'll see teams playing them a little bit tougher. So we'll see whether or not it's sustainable for either team. But for New Jersey, they've been a lot of fun to watch. And even though, they came in, they beat Vancouver this week, I can't be mad at them. They're just they're the better team. So yeah, we'll see how far this can go. Maple Leafs having some injury problems with their goaltenders. Of course, Matt Murray still on the LTIR. Samsonov got hurt last night, and it's bad enough that they have signed. Basically, it's not on an emergency basis, but it kind of is. Keith Petruzzelli has been signed by the team, a goaltender. So Shalgren's going to be the main guy for a little while here. We'll see how long Samsonov's going to be out, and whether or not Kyle Dubas acquires somebody else in the goaltending sphere. There may be a goaltender or two that becomes available. It just off the top of my head, there's a situation in Vegas where they may have 3 goaltenders soon because of Bressois coming back up. The problem is all 3 of those goaltenders are signed to contracts that the Leafs would have a really hard time fitting under their cap. And so that becomes a problem as well, right? So we'll see what Toronto does, but it's going to depend on how long Samsonov's going to be out. We'll see whether or not Keith Petruzzelli gets into action or who else comes up and ends up with Shalgren. And it doesn't necessarily mean whoever's the backup today's the backup tomorrow. That's his life of goaltenders in the National Hockey League. Yesterday, of course, the Washington Capitals claimed Nicholas Aube-Kubel on waivers from Toronto. I didn't feel like that should be its own video. So when I saw that, I was like, it makes some sense. Aube-Kubel is one of these interesting players that, can he be useful in certain circumstances? Yes, but as he started bouncing around the league, yeah, that's a positive there. He absolutely has. So we'll see if this is his final stop. Washington, of course, everybody's hurt right now. I just assume like most of their lineup is injured because that's kind of how that's working for them. But at least last night, Ovechkin set a new record. With his 787th goal, he passed Gordie Howe. He has now got the most goals scored by one player with one team, meaning that Gretzky's got the all-time record, but Pocklington traded him to LA before he could get to that kind of a mark. And then LA traded him before he went to market. He wasn't in St. Louis very long, and with the Rangers, he wasn't really a goal scorer at that point either. So, yeah, Ovechkin now has the all-time record. Of course, the record he's keeping his eye on is that Gretzky record, and he's getting closer and closer to said record. So we'll see when he gets there and how many goals he puts up this year to get himself closer to that mark. Detroit, so today, Coach Lalonde is going to be giving some sort of an update on Philip Zadina. It can't be great, though, because if a guy's out with a lower body injury and it's only day-to-day, that's what they'll say it is. Of course, for Zadina, he hasn't had any luck when it comes to getting the puck to go in the net for him. And if he's out for a long period this year, I don't know how much longer he'll be a Red Wing, because the Red Wings are getting better, and Zadina's numbers haven't really improved along the way. So hopefully Zadina's not out that long and gets things figured out. But I will be interested to see whether it's going to be months that he's out, whether it's week to week, or what's going on with him. Again, it's a lower body injury. That's all we know at this stage. For Pittsburgh last night, there was some good news and bad news. The good news we'll get to first. This guy, Sidney Crosby, reaches 900 assists, and I think he's the 5th fastest to do so. That being said, the losing streak has hit 7. Pittsburgh at this point, they're in this tough spot where they're in the Metro. It is not easy to make up points in the Metro. And so, yeah, I do think that at some point we're going to see some kind of a big change. I want to say it could end up being a trade, but which core player do you trade? Which player do you trade right now from Pittsburgh that's going to have a lot of value without breaking up some of that core that Crosby, Malkin, Letang decided to keep the band together to try to, get into the playoffs and perhaps win another Stanley Cup. So there's a balancing act there. And then, of course, the obvious answer would be, well, they could fire the coach, and they absolutely could. I do think that for Mike Sullivan, he gets an extra amount of leeway because they did win, the Stanley Cup under his watch a couple of times. And so, yeah, I think that definitely keeps him employed for a little while longer, but eventually every coach gets fired, or I guess retires. Retirement happens as well, but yeah, we'll see how long it is for Pittsburgh before they make a move. It doesn't feel like it's going to be much longer. Brad Marchand hit 800 points. He was the only Bruin that got on the scoreboard because that 800th point was via the penalty shot. So for Marchand, it's going to be interesting when his career's done and he's got over 1,000 points, and people who can't stand Marchand realize, oh, he could end up in the Hall of Fame. That's going to be entertaining. That being said, Marchand was one of the better Bruins last night. Toronto did beat him. Toronto, of course, with Carolina on the schedule today. We'll see how they do against Carolina. And for Boston, we'll see how they bounce back this coming week. Claude Giroux, of course, scored his 300th last night against the Philadelphia Flyers. It's the first goal he'd ever scored against the Flyers. It was the first game he'd ever played against the Flyers. And so for Giroux, it's a good story. But again, much like with Crosby and with Ovechkin too, really. If anybody hit a milestone last night, apparently it was not great for their team. Good for them. But for Giroux, 300 goals is impressive. And he's had likely a Hall of Fame career along the way too. So here's to hoping that the Sens can turn things around a little bit. It's gotten kind of ugly in Ottawa. Speaking of kind of ugly, Matthew Tkachuk last night, of course, in the review I talked about how he was basically the distraction towards the end of the game. He has a hearing today with player safety, so this is a suspension. The only time that we've seen over the last, I want to say 2 seasons, that it's a hearing and it's not a suspension was Subban, who got fined last year. Every other time it's been a suspension, so Tkachuk, it looks like, is getting suspended. Now, if they rule that he high-sticked Jonathan Quick in the eye on purpose, if that's the rule, or ruling that they give, it could be a lengthy suspension for Tkachuk. And he's been the best Florida Panther. The Florida Panthers are absolutely in a funk right now. And in the event that they don't have Tkachuk for any length of time, that's going to hurt their attack a lot. This is a team that's already missing Huberdeau. I think they're missing Weegar on the blue line. We know they're missing Ekblad on the blue line right now. So, yeah, it's kind of something Florida really doesn't need. And it's interesting because Tkachuk, when he was in Calgary the last couple of years, we hadn't seen any of this kind of behavior from him. And now he's in Florida. That's surfaced again. So I remember the league pulling him aside and having conversations with him about, you can't be doing this crap, and maybe it's time for another talk. We'll see. But he's got a hearing today before that talk can take place. Interesting road trips coming up this week. The Flames, the Oilers, and the Canucks are all headed out on the road. For the Oilers, they had a decent homestand. They're good on the road as well. The Flames are very good on the road. For the Canucks, it has been a disastrous start to the season, and now they head east because, of course, they do. So we'll see how things go for these 3 teams, but it feels like one of these Western Canadian teams right now is in a really good spot to make the playoffs, and the Oilers, and the other 2, well, the Flames, it's getting kind of a little dicey, and for the Canucks, Hope is not lost yet, but it's fading a bit. Another 3-goal lead that they blew. It doesn't make the fan base feel great. I know it doesn't make the players feel great either. We'll see how much longer that goes before there's a change in Vancouver of some sort. Nashville note to throw up on the board as well. Eeli Tolvanen has been a healthy scratch for the Nashville Predators in 4 of their last 5. It was not this past offseason, but the offseason before that David Poile was talking about how he felt Eeli Tolvanen was ready to break through and become a top 6 forward. And it just hasn't really worked out that way for Tolvanen. And if he's a healthy scratch much more often, if this continues, you'd have to think that they may end up moving him. He may end up being trade bait. And you would think that, too, he's young enough and talented enough that somebody would give him a chance, even though he is off to a rough start this year, because teams will always be interested in young, inexpensive, talented forwards. So we'll see what happens with Tolvanen. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And I'll say this with Tkachuk, if the NHL Department of Player Safety rules it was on purpose, it might be a bit of a longer hearing or a bit of a longer suspension. But remember, with this hearing, they're not offering him an in-person, so don't bet on a longer one. It's probably going to be 1 or 2 games. So let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.